a lot of news right now, but maybe some will come throughout this hour, and that is where we thrive in the chaos. I'm Chris Spags, joined by Professor Chaos himself, Mr. Fast Eddie Fear. How are you doing, Eddie?
I'm good, and I officially am lobbying to be called Professor Chaos at all times from now. Like, that's excellent.
I hope you know the reference, right? The Butters South Park Professor Chaos as well.
I didn't get the reference, and I've seen
I thought you were
that episode, and for some reason Professor Chaos isn't sticking with me from it. But I've seen their superheroes and he's in this ridiculous outfit patrolling the night and the whole thing. I don't remember Professor Chaos, but that's objectively wonderful, and I'll take it. Butters is great. I relate to Butters. I think Butters and I have a lot in common. There's a very I can see that.
Yeah, he's an adorable, sweet-hearted, toe-headed little boy, and I think that fits your criteria as well. And that's also part of why Thrive Fantasy sponsors this show. We want to give a quick little shout-out to Thrive Fantasy up top. Thrive Fantasy, if you're not familiar, you've seen the logo on the videos, but they're a new DFS app where players draft a lineup built of prop bets of only top-tier athletes. You pick 10 props out of the 20, and the less probable a prop is to occur, the more points it's worth. And that's where the game theory lies. So I'm going to drop a link right in here. You use the promo code AWESEMOLBL, and you click this link, or just download the app. You get $5 credit, so you get that right away. Don't even have to deposit. That's just your money right away. Just play it, win it, and it's yours. So go ahead, click that link, enter the promo code AWESEMOLBL now. Eddie, the guy who's got a prop bet that interests me right up top, James Harden they have with an over-under of 37.5 points. You got 100 for the over and the under. Where would you go with James Harden?
37.5. I will take barely the under on that. I have him for a little bit less.
All right. I'm on the same page. I have him at 35.4 today, which surprised me. I would have thought I would have had him a little more with the matchup with the Sixers, but apparently not. So go play that prop right now. Both of us are under, so that's just about as sure of a bet as you can get. Play it on Thrive Fantasy right now. Eddie, how are you feeling? I guess while we're talking about Harden, how are we feeling about this Rockets Sixers game? We got Ben Simmons, who was questionable earlier. He is going to be in with an illness. No value there with TJ McConnell or the other guys getting some more looks. But how are you feeling about this game, and would you have any exposure?
Obviously having Simmons in is a bit of a downer, although the game projects to play a little bit closer now. But I was pretty happy to load up on James Harden in the event that Simmons had been out, just because the defensive matchup would have gotten a little bit ridiculous for both him and Chris Paul, both of whom I think are in pretty exciting spots still. I probably slightly prefer Chris Paul at his prices, but I do like having some exposure to one of those guys. Probably would end up a little under on Clint Capella. Again, he's looked good in 1 out of the 8 games or what have you since he came back. If he's going to be as popular as we suggest he's going to be, I would probably look to go somewhere else at center. On DraftKings, it's only a couple thousand more to pay up to get a pretty consistent, playing so well the last month or so under Drummond, of course I'm referring to, but just a number of guys you can throw in there that I probably would have less than the field on Capella. Not to say that he doesn't have obviously a big ceiling whenever he's priced under 7K. But I like Vooch a fair amount on DK at his price. Certainly you can do worse than throwing Gobert out there. Again, the spot isn't brilliant and the pace in that game is dreadful, but 8K is still, pretty cheap for a guy. I still project for over 40. Not having Simmons in there and him going against a backcourt consisting frequently of, Redick and McConnell would have been a bit of a field day for Harden, and that would have tilted me more towards him than Chris Paul. But like getting a piece of Houston in here, if you can manage it, probably have Paul first and then Harden second.
How about Jimmy Butler today? He didn't have the big day we had hoped for against Chicago. It was not as spiteful as we had thought Jimmy to be. But he did shoot the ball enough. He could have had that big day, I think, if he had gotten a little more lucky there. He's interesting to me because this is going to be a pace-down spot. I like games where it's going to be kind of half-courty. I think that's a better spot for Jimmy Butler to be in. Simmons being back in, not great. But how would you feel about going back to Jimmy Butler today?
The DK price still, offers a fair bit of upside, and he's frequently giving you the 35 to not kill you at 71 or 7,200. FanDuel would have been an interesting spot again if Simmons had been out. But I'm fine with Butler. I still generally do prefer him to Tobias Harris at this point. If you're looking to get a piece of this Philadelphia side and you want to save a bit of money off Ben Simmons. I like Ben Simmons a lot right now at 9,100. I expect his ownership to come down due to somewhat of the shenanigans today, the mark of Cain with the Q next to him, etc. So, sorry, I'm trying to deal with the audio here. Apparently we had a pretty significant echo at the beginning, which I'm trying to reduce, but somewhat unsuccessfully. I'm not sure what gives at random here.
Yeah, I feel like it was perfect apparently when you came back from when you were with the dogs. So maybe, I don't know, maybe your computer just needs a rest. You're working it too hard.
I don't think that's it, but okay.
Punch in Eddie's mouth. Eddie sounds like Drowsy, the Pokemon. Okay.
I don't remember what Drowsy sounds like. I can do a number of Pokemon impressions, but I've been yesterday having a day off. I had the time to play some Apex Legends, and my squads were having a lot of fun because I was generally playing the entire game in character. So I did, a couple maps as Elmo, and then a couple maps as Herbert the Pervert, and people, really tend to get into it. So shoot me a tag or friend me, Fast Eddie Fear in Origin or something, and I will make you laugh if we play.
Got a question for you since we did talk about that Houston-Philly game. I guess to close the loop on that, how would you rank your favorite cheap Philly power forwards on FanDuel between Bolden, Amir Johnson, and Mike Scott?
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's Amir Johnson in cash and Bolden in tournaments for me between those three guys. All reasonably close in the same range, but I think that's where I would come out Bolden with the best chance at spiking that upside and the ownership a little better for me. Mike Scott elsewhere.
Yep, I think that seems fair. All right, let's go to some of the other games here. We have a situation with a pretty decent point total in Charlotte, a game with the Wizards and the Hornets. Kemba Walker going to be one of the higher owned guys in the slate, and obviously we will talk about the ownership projections we're seeing the halfway point of the show. I like Kemba a lot today. I find it hard to get away from him. I know there's a lot of concerns about chalk Kemba, and he is going to be pretty highly owned at about a quarter of the field right now, probably a little bit over that. How are we feeling about Kemba today?
Yeah, I love him. It's as good of a spot as you're going to get. The price is inexplicably low for him for what's really about the best possible matchup. The last couple games with the Wizards had 50 and 60. I'm projected for a bit north of 50. He's just well too cheap. If he was 40% owned, we'd start getting into a conversation, but I expect that number to be somewhere closer to 20, and for that reason, I'm all in. I think it's a great spot. Obviously, you want some pieces of this Charlotte team. It ends up being a little bit site dependent, but DraftKings especially, one is the bare minimum I'd want, and frequently that would be Kemba. But second favorite for me, DraftKings or FanDuel, is actually going to be Marvin Williams. Really fine spot for him, 52 and 44. I think he ends up being my second favorite guy. I don't have an issue going back to Jeremy Lamb. Had a part of the good show we had on Wednesday or what have you, where he was, my big fade was Jeremy Lamb, instead play White or Satoransky, or three guys who were pivots off him scored 25 or 30 points more. So that was key. That was a really tough matchup, and he had been overperforming what I expected, and you had lots of sort of ridiculous peripheral games where he picked up 14 rebounds, and I didn't expect him to keep going at quite that level. That being said, now he has just a brilliant matchup. So, again, ownership dependent. I'm still probably a little happier to play Batum. I'm probably a little happier to play Marvin Williams. But as opposed to that night where I thought at his ownership it was just an abject mistake to play Jeremy Lamb, he's still in a very fine spot, and it's too cheap for what you could get out of him here. But yeah, for me, I'm probably Kemba, a pretty clear one, and then it's Marvin, Batum, Lamb, Zeller, then Kaminsky if I'm going there.
So you're not trying to – we talked about Kaminsky last time, and he did have that day again, the same 25-ish fantasy point day that he's had, I think, 3 times in a row now. Yeah. Can he do it again, or would you care enough to go to him when we have Royce O'Neal, another guy who's going to be popular at a cheap price, and maybe he doesn't have a ceiling even approaching what Kaminsky's has shown? Would you go back to him?
I would generally probably rather play Royce. I'm asking for something to go really well for me either way. It's really close. I have Royce for 39 minutes. I have Frank for 23. And that still makes them really, really, really close. And again, Royce has nearly worst possible matchup, and Frank has pretty close to best possible matchup. So that ends up working out pretty evenly for me. There's a couple other Royce pivots I think I might enjoy a little bit more of the guys I've been looking at. I enjoy running out Darius Miller. I really like getting to the wings on Denver. Not to get overly into it, but frequently you see a matchup where you get Clay spending a lot of time trying to keep Jamal Murray down, and more frequently and more consistently than the other guys on this team, you get the 2s and the 3s for Denver showing out against this Warriors team that's been running pretty similar staffing and pretty similar teams for a few years now. You get the best games out of Gary Harris and Will Barton quite frequently. So on DraftKings, where he's way the hell too cheap, I really like Gary Harris at 4K. Obviously, that's still significantly more. Do I know that Lamb is not starting? Yes, I know that Lamb is not starting. Thanks for the tip. Miles Bridges is starting. Lamb moved to the bench and has been playing one game down towards 20 minutes, but upwards to 30 or 32 minutes. But yes, I definitely know he's not starting. The last game against Miami was pretty dreadful. And I would say I knew more than everyone else about Jeremy Lamb on that day. Anyway, But Gary Harris, Will Barton, a little too cheap on FanDuel, or he's dollar for dollar, even a little bit cheaper than he is on DK. And Gary Harris, 4,000 on DK, I like a lot. Probably still just tournaments. This is obviously a rotation that is just overflowing with dudes still trying to hedge in Isaiah Thomas in this particular matchup. I think there's a real chance that Torrey Craig's minutes get into the low 20s, as they can use him as a stopper against any number of talented offensive players on this Golden State team. But I do think most of that time, comes off Malik Beasley and Monty Morris, etc. So still tournaments only probably, but I like Will Barton, especially on FanDuel, and Gary Harris, especially on DK. I just got there because you were asking about Royce.
Yeah, no, I'm actually with you on Gary Harris. And also just to close the loop, Marvin Williams also projecting very highly for me today too. And Jeremy Lamb, I share your thoughts on, even though people are razzing you about him not starting. He's still getting about 30 minutes a game.
I know he's not starting. Well, I was curious as to whether the guy thought I didn't know he wasn't starting. Like, that's very random. I miss little bits of data once in a while. It's pretty rare. And yes, I knew and probably have said on a show that he isn't starting something the order of 19 times. So no, knew that one.
Yeah, sometimes players do well even when not starting. I think that's it's a crazy thing to know. Speaking of the guy who also does well when not starting, give me your thoughts on the Clippers game. Yes.
You're going to, it's like you talk about Lou Williams and Karis LeVert and Rudy Gay coming off the bench. Like there's all kinds of guys who, in a vacuum, coming off the bench is usually better than starting for guys. If you give me the exact same number of minutes, you're usually going against you're going against more backups, which will in general be lower quality defenders, and you're going with generally lower usage starters. So generally, a guy moving to the bench if he holds his minutes is a positive move. I like Lou Williams a lot. That game, obviously, all the pace in the world. I like a lot of pieces of that game. I'm probably most worried about Montrez of the guys who have a ceiling, but I kind of like the floor and the ceiling for both Gallinari, where he's all the way down at 6,200, where I have him projected for about 35, and Lou Williams, where the sky is the limit, and I think he's 68 on DK and an even probably better 73 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. And also, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's been pretty good recently in terms of hitting value at a consistent level.
Yeah, another guy who, I had 4K I'm not thrilled with. I feel like the upside is a little bit limited just because of the role. But, yeah, don't mind him whatsoever.
All right, let's see where else we should go. What about the other side here with the Thunder? They're coming off of this back-to-back. It was an overtime game. Paul George as well, shooting really poorly over the last 3 games. He got there fantasy-wise yesterday, but he's shooting about like 8 for 25. I don't have numbers in front of me, but the last 3 games he's been like 8 for 24, 7 for 25, those kind of numbers. How are you feeling about Paul George on a back-to-back where I think you've had shoulder issues before, but I don't want to misquote, but rotator cuff on a back-to-back doesn't seem like the best.
Yeah, obviously his shot has been a little concerning coming off the shoulder injury that we've seen recently. I'm going to resubmit the rankings in a few seconds. I'm not sure whether they're not up, but I'll do it again after this comment. We'll get back to that. There was that last multiple overtime game they had where they came out the next night and they just didn't have it, especially Steven Adams and Paul George looked pretty shitty in that game off multiple overtimes a couple weeks ago. This is a road trip. They're on the road both these games. That is some minor concern for me. Again, the DK prices are pretty sweet. FanDuel, I see myself pivoting other places a lot. But with some exposure to the Clippers, you're frequently going to want to run it back there. So I generally like Harden a little more than Westbrook. I generally like Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant a little bit more than Paul George in this spot. But they're all, very, very similarly packaged as to how much we can hope to get out of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that I like Westbrook a little more than George today because I think George can almost be a decoy if he's not feeling 100%. You don't want to assume a guy's not 100%, but just looking at his shooting numbers compared to where they were during his hot run, that always, that can flow around. But I think there's enough reason to look at and be like, maybe he's not there. I think Westbrook is in a good spot because of this George being out there, the spacing he creates. I think will help him out. Steven Adams as well, I think, could benefit if Paul George isn't 100%. I think he's an interesting play if you're not playing Paul George in the same lineup.
Yeah, I do think you want to. Well, I mean, you can obviously stack this game. It's expensive to go with multiple guys on the Thunder for obvious reasons. It's a really good spot for Steven Adams. He had one tepid game and two really good games against the Clippers this year, which isn't surprising at all. They're I think he's a very strong cash play, and I'm fine with him in tournaments. He has 2 games of 43, 45, I want to say, against him this year. Setting aside the overtime and the potential difficulties inherent there, I'm still a fan of his. I would probably, if I'm building one lineup, cash certainly, and I'd definitely think about it in tournaments, playing him over Clint Capella, for example.
All right, let's go. I think we've covered this one pretty well. There's a situation which we should talk about. In New Orleans, Drew Holiday is going to be out. As a result, Elfrid Payton projected to be one of the highest owned players on the slate right now. What are you doing with this situation here? And do you think Elfrid Payton's worth being the chalk? He's pretty cheap, but I don't know if the upside's there.
I think the upside's there. There's just going to be a lot of usage going around, and many of the bodies who are going to fill in here aren't the biggest usage guys. I generally, in a tournament, would prefer running Frank Jackson to Royce. If you're building one lineup on DK, I probably have Frank in there before I have Royce in there for $100 less. I have him at 29 minutes. Obviously not a brilliant matchup, but it's a Raptors team that has played down a little bit more defensively recently. That has something to do with Kawhi absences being in there pretty frequently. But I think in a tournament generally I would try to play either Darius Miller or Frank Jackson. I'm a fan of either of those guys. Again, Etuan Moore is going to be out as well, alongside Drew Holiday. Anthony Davis still limited, so there's a lot of minutes to go around here. So someone on this team is going to have to score, and a lot of them are really, really the hell cheap. So as far as playing these guys in tournaments as punts, I'm probably Jackson, then Kenrich Williams, then Darius Miller. I think among the super cheapies, but Elf at 5,000, I haven't projected to play 34 minutes, and that's just a little bit too cheap for a guy who should take a couple more shots. Wouldn't be surprised to see him back ending into that low-end triple-10, triple-double in this situation. The line is concerning. Obviously, they could get their ass totally kicked, but in a vacuum, I think Elf is definitely worth $5,000 even in this matchup.
So I guess, because I think somebody will have this question, so we might as well get to it now. If you were to rank Pelicans based upon your interest, I mean, you mentioned Drew Holiday, obviously a relatively high usage guy, also a high assist guy. There's going to be a lot of playmaking opportunities to go around. And Julius Randle, for example, should get the ball more. Kenrich Williams always soaks up the usage that's left behind from anybody being out. How would you rank your Pelicans based upon interest as a result of Drew being out?
It's difficult because sites change a little bit, positionalities change a little bit, but I will hesitantly go using the DK prices. My interest in getting him into a lineup is probably Elf, Jackson, Randall. Yeah, probably Elf, Jackson, Randall. Elf, Jackson, Randall, Kenrich, Darius, I think would be my order on trying to get those guys in.
All right. I think that seems reasonable to me. How about the other side? We've got obviously a big pace-up spot for, well, not a big,
Jackson
not
is
big
starting,
enough.
Not surprised. Shame that it came out because he's in both my FanDuel and DraftKings hypothetical lineups right now, I think. Yep, he's in both of them. So Apparently he's going to start, but that's what I expected.
Wait, who was starting? I missed who you actually said.
Frank Jackson. Somebody just said.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Interesting. How do you think he plays? Does he cut into the effect of Elf at all? I mean, I guess you assumed he was already starting, so maybe not. But I just want to address that.
It's yes. You would rather have other guys who are less able to create their own shot and do stuff start there, but it's not enough of a factor that I still don't think Elf is worth in excess of his $5,000 in this spot. Like, it's not the best matchup, but he objectively at this spot should cost $6,000, $6,500. Is just going to be asked to do a ton there. So sure, I would rather he was starting next to the Solomon Hills of the world, who aren't going to do a hell of a lot offensively, but he's still, especially DK price, still well too cheap. FanDuel is still too cheap, but not as egregiously so as DraftKings.
And the nightly question from Roboshua in the premium Slack: can we do AD at 7,600 on FanDuel?
I would be disinclined towards it. It's not undoable. Matchup is fine for him, but I would rather play Pascal Siakam across the ball. I would rather play Blake Griffin. Look, Blake Griffin has been disappointing many times this year, and especially when he's chalk and is somewhat difficult to predict. Had 60-something once against the Bulls this year, but that was the game Andre Drummond fouled out, if memory serves. And in the other game, you got like 60 out of Drummond and 40-something out of Blake, but $8,500 on FanDuel is still an underpricing for Blake Griffin. But I like Kevin Love tonight. Kevin Love, I believe this matchup will cause him to be even more usage dominant than normal. We'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a extremely significant usage game out of Kevin Love this evening. All right, I've re-uploaded the rankings if they are not there now. Someone poke me yet again, but that should have done it. I don't know why I didn't do it the first time. So can you do Anthony Davis? Yeah, but would rather it on DK, and even there would be in my second tier of guys.
All right.
FanDuel works as well, just because you can get 3 steals and 3 blocks in 22 minutes. He just did that actually, so it's you can pull 50 out of that, but he would be down my list of power forwards. I like.
Here's a related question: can you rank the high-end power forwards on FanDuel for GPPs?
I would love to.
Would you really?
I
feel like you tolerate it. I don't know if you love it.
High end, does that mean more than Marvin? We are going to be splitting hairs here a lot, I should point out. It is very difficult for me to differentiate between... I will start at Millsap, I guess. Actually, Millsap is lower than most of the guys on this list. So I will start at Draymond. I like Draymond. So here's the guys on this list that I have, within a reasonable range of how much I like them. I like Draymond. I like Montrez. I don't hate Dwight Powell, but he's probably a nudge down because of the matchup. I like Pascal. I like Tobias Harris. I like Lauri Markkanen. I like Blake Griffin. I like Kevin Love. I like Julius Randle. All those guys are fairly close for me, and the number one determinant would be ownership for me. I'm actually just going to load up our ownership and take a look at what it says on FanDuel and react to that, because that's the single largest thing, rather than me trying to differentiate between which I have at 1.1 points per dollar and which I have at 1.13 points per dollar. Sure. Main slate, ownership, FanDuel, position, actually salary position. Does that work? Can we double click here? Does that work? Does that work? Look at all these tools we have. They're so cool.
Yeah, you're speechless because you're amazed at all the things you could do on Osmo.com with our lineup builder and our ownership projections. You know what, Eddie? I don't know if you knew this. Get 50% off your first month with the promo code LiveBeforeLock. So
good tip.
Why don't you out there go to Osmo.com and do that now, just like Eddie is.
Right,
anyway,
so we do have these guys, unsurprisingly, which is what I would expect when I have them all ranked pretty similarly. Most of them are in the same ownership range. We have 7 on Green, 9 on Montrez, 9 on Aaron Gordon, for what it's worth, who I like a little bit less in this spot. 9 on Anthony Davis, 11 on Pascal, 7 on Lauri Markkanen, 11 on Blake, 12 on Randle. So it's a giant chunk of guys with pretty similar ownership. Now we have Tobias Harris at 5, I like him a little bit less. And we have Kevin Love at 3. So $8,600 for Kevin Love feels a little wonky with his reduced limitation. But I expect him to see lots of Olynyk, which is a matchup he enjoys, and he tends to be a little vengeful about because of that one time, just that little thing where Kelly Olynyk ripped his arm out of his socket, which wasn't very cool. So I am guessing, I really like these guys. That is a very tough question for me. Depending on how many other guys I have from New Orleans, really like Julius Randle because the amount of time and usage he should have to soak up here and do some very real damage. I am guessing in my first lineup right now I would have Blake Griffin and Kevin Love. That's just my guess. But I have, again, no issue with if you're saving some money, you can obviously dump $1,800 and get down to Draymond. But Draymond, Montrez, Pascal, I actually like quite a bit in this spot. Laurie, Blake, Julius, Kevin, all those guys. But I'll go with Kevin and Blake by a nose due to the ownership on Kevin and Blake to an extent. It is a good spot for him. So I think he bounces, and his ownership is a little bit depressed from what it should be at that price. On FanDuel, he should cost $9,300 against the Bulls, so he is discounted by nearly $1,000.
So one question I want to hit, because you did mention the game with the Cavs and the Heat. Kelly Olynyk over 45 fantasy points in 2 out of the last 3 games. I think he got 43 minutes last game, if I'm remembering correctly. Would you play Olynyk today? Is he worth a tournament shot or two?
Yeah, I think he's worth a tournament shot. That's exactly the right way to describe him. Goran Dragic is in, which just sort of screws everything up. But yep. I don't think we've seen an actual Heat lineup, which would be interesting. I really like Hassan Whiteside if he starts. I don't think he's out of play if he comes off the bench. Just a monster goddamn spot. So even 20 minutes off the bench, $6,400. I'd have him projected for about 30 fantasy points, so we'd need to do some work there. But if he starts, and we think he might get 26 minutes, 28 minutes, Hassan Whiteside, I'd be pretty excited about. And another guy I'd try to run in there before apparently pretty chalky Clint Capella.
All right. We're getting some questions about the Pistons-Bulls game, which I do want to hit on, but let's do the halftime daddy likes first. Let's make it quick since we already talked about some of these guys. Sure. And of course, if you are playing along at home, use the promo code Live Before Lock, get half off your first month, so you can see all the ownership projections that we discuss on the show, which again are one of the most important things when you're building lineups. So you know where the field is, you know what's going to be good chalk, what's going to be bad chalk. It's all available if you use the promo code Live Before Lock, get half off your first month. Eddie, number 1 on the list, we have Big Elf, Elfrid Payton, 37% expected ownership on DraftKings. How does Daddy feel about that?
Yeah, I think I'd have a touch more, but again, not a significant take on that for me. That's about where it should be for all players in all contests on all slate. There is a sweet spot where you want them and don't want them. There's some very complicated, binomial equation of this is their ownership, this is their projection, these are all the points on their curve where they're likely to score this number. At what point do you want them at? And as in Wednesday, Jeremy Lamb was just simply not worth it at the ownership he projected. That's about the right number for Elfrid Payton. If that was 20, it would be like, yeah, get way the hell over it. That number's too small. If it was 50, you start to think more of a fade. Mid to high 30s, which is about what I projected, is about where it should be. It's a bad enough matchup. The game could go sideways. He's not that cheap that, some degree of hesitancy is appropriate, but just still objectively too cheap. So I will slightly say I would want to get on top of that, but only by a hair.
And also just because this news came in just real fast, Ricky Rubio officially ruled out, but obviously we've been talking like that's been the expectation anyway. Number 2 on the ownership percentages right now, related to that item, Royce O'Neal, 33% expected ownership. How does Daddy feel about the Rolls Royce?
Yeah, and in tournaments, I would probably come in under, especially, and I expect that to come down a little bit now because Frank Jackson is getting the start astride Elfrid Payton there. So I would rather run Frank Jackson generally. There's a few other cheaper guys in a tournament. I would probably rather run Darius Miller. That's a little closer for me. I like Royce just fine. I have him at 39 minutes and 25 fantasy points. That feels just fine for $3,300, and that's so much time that extra rebound here and there, picking up some peripheral stats. Sure, he can get to the 30. That makes him absolutely brilliant. So I generally like Royce. I imagine I would come in a little under that.
Kemba Walker, number 3, 25% expected ownership on DraftKings. How does Daddy feel about that?
Yeah, I think I'd get on top of that too. Yeah, I would almost certainly get on top of that. I think I'd be closer to the 35 or 40 mark. Obviously, it's some sort of investment. Chalk Kemba is very reasonably a thing where he disappoints where he's supposed to be amazing, but both on paper, having watched the matchup previously on video, both previous games this year against the Wizards, it's just a very, very good spot. So, yeah, I would get on top of that.
Yeah, I am currently at about double that right now, but yeah, I'm Team Kemba as well. I think it's a good spot. Satoransky does throw a little bit of a wrench at him sometimes, but
Yeah.
I think it's a good matchup.
Not enough of a wrench.
Yeah, I agree. For the amount of usage he has too, like either way, he's going to get those 30 shots. He might shoot 5 for 30. He's going to shoot like 25, 30 times. That's just what Kemba's going to do. Frank Jackson, number 4, Eddie, 24%. How does Daddy feel about it?
24, you said?
24.
I'll hesitantly have a little bit less than that as well. I like Frank Jackson a lot as a player. Been talking about him ever since Summer League. I was hoping he'd be a little less than that, so I would want to come in a little under that. In tournaments, I would probably want around 20% of him, around 20% of Royce O'Neal, somewhere, around 20%. There's just enough guys in that area you can pivot to, and then just enough guys like, Gary Harris and Marvin Williams and Kenrich Williams, who are just a little bit more, and who you can use as your salary savers. So I suspect I would come in the numbers under on both those value guys.
All right, and number 5 to close us out, another guy we've talked about already, Marvin Williams, who we both like, 22% expected ownership. How does Daddy feel about it?
Yeah, I'll go over on that. That's, the difference there being, even though he's popular, that's a pretty brilliant matchup. Not the most consistent guy in the world, but the matchup is exceptional, and I have him for 33 minutes. Hard to think that he'll default entirely. I have him projected for north of 30, so yeah, I'll go over on Marvin.
And I guess this is a separate question, one we haven't done before, but I feel like it's relevant with these cheap guys. These guys who are going to be cheap and going to be high owned, Frank Jackson, Royce O'Neal, how would you feel about them in cash?
Oh, I think they're both now lock cash plays.
Okay.
If you're building a cash lineup, you should probably go Frank Jackson, Royce O'Neal, and then start moving on with the rest of the lineup.
Yeah. All right. I'm with you. Let's move on. Let's talk about that Pistons Bulls game because it's one that we've both talked about pieces of. Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond. Drummond, a guy I like a lot today. The Bulls side, I find a little bit harder to parse out because the shots seem to be flowing around a little bit too much. Larry Markkinen shot just 9 times last game. There's the least that he's put up in about 2 months. Robin Lopez taking some usage. Otto Porter taking some usage. But the Pistons side looks good to me. Bulls side, interesting, but tougher to figure out, as I mentioned. What would you do in this game?
Yeah, I'm not the hugest fan of the Bulls. Some of the prices have come down a little bit, but the matchup isn't that great when they're all together healthy. The usage gets spread out a little bit. Again, Chris Dunn all the way down under $5,000. Obviously, you can do that in a tournament. Maybe the best micro matchup, getting to deal with Reggie in a sort of anemic backcourt because the Pistons pretty strong defensively on the wings recently and obviously pretty big up front. So I can see firing that bullet. Zach LaVine and Lauri Markkinen both talented enough they can, bludgeon their way to just a volume game. I probably do slightly prefer Zach LaVine in this spot than Lauri Markkinen because of the matchup. But beyond that, Otto Porter, down towards 6,000 is obviously too cheap. I don't have a problem with him sort of as a cash play almost, but there is some sort of upside there. You can certainly run out Otto Porter and Robin Lopez, where he's still 5.5. Going against a big team, especially, you have to think he gets his 34, 36 minutes again. Not out of play for me. Again, more of a cashy Cody Zeller-esque play. It'd be difficult to see him completely going off in this spot, though he's played Drummond pretty well in the past. So I'm very ambivalent on the Bulls. If you were going super heavy on Detroit, I can see going back there. But generally, there's someone I like a little more. Like, I just like Lou Williams a little more than Zach LaVine. I just like all those other power forwards we talked about a little more than Lauri Markkinen. I'm fine having one of those guys as a Bull. I don't have a strong preference for which one. It'd probably be in the backcourt. It'd be Dunn or LaVine would be the first two I would look at, site dependent.
Yeah, Dunn's interesting at his cheap price. Not much of a ceiling shown recently, but he's under 5K on DraftKings. It's an interesting play. I just wish he had the ball in his hands a little bit more.
Yeah.
Don't Embiid, my status asking, can you play Drummond and Blake in the same FanDuel lineup?
I have no issue with it in cash. In tournaments, if you're building a single lineup, it strikes me as not ideal simply because of the superfluity of very good high-priced power forward options. Like, could it work out? Yeah, obviously. You can get some overtimes, or you can just get, 59 and 56 out of those two guys, and that holds up. But more frequently, a more optimal build would be Andre Drummond next to Kevin Love, or Andre Drummond next to Lauri Markkanen, who's, you're even getting some synergy across the ball there. Or getting Julius Randle in there, or Pascal Siakam and saving some money, etc., etc. So, can you? You obviously can. Should you in one lineup? I doubt that would be an optimal build for me. And if you were to do it, again, if you're not running Lauri in that spot, I'd try to get Zach LaVine in there at the 2 or something.
Yep, I think that seems fair.
Gasol starting. Haha.
Oh, so yeah, that dovetails with the question I was going to ask from K-Chef Killicam. Thoughts on Serge if he starts? So how are the big for Toronto looking now?
Yeah, he would have been great. He's not. Moving on. I like Gasol quite a bit. I mean, Gasol, FanDuel especially is 67, I think is the number. Yeah, 67 on FanDuel. I don't dislike that. So, we can think. I'll hesitantly somewhat project him for 29 minutes, I think now. But yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable spot. So I'm checking the DraftKings price because for some reason my notes are being squirrely. They went the way of the audio. 56 on DraftKings also makes an incredible amount of sense.
All right.
Don't completely sleep on Donovan Mitchell, I want to say.
I agree.
The matchup is garbage, but with Rubio out and Royce in there just sort of wasting time, both he and Ingles get increased chance of hitting the super ceiling. Is it likely? No. Not going to be in my first lineup certainly, but it's his chance of putting up 60 goes way the hell up when you take Ricky Rubio out of there. So I'd have some exposure to that in a lot of lineups. Still generally would like him less than LaVine at that price. Certainly Lou Williams, but not out of play for me.
How about the other side of that? So Avery Bradley, we talked about this on the other show. I think if you use just the stats he's had on Memphis, he does project still to be a pretty solid play here, both from a value and an upside perspective. I like the matchup here. It's technically a pace up for Memphis. Every game's a pace up for Memphis, really. Bradley coming up a lot for me, as is Jonas Valančiūnas. How are we feeling about the Memphis side?
I can certainly see both those. It is a difficult spot for Valančiūnas. As has been widely reported, centers have done better themselves against Gobert this year, and I don't have an issue with anyone playing J-Val because obviously he can just start to take over a game. So I think they're both just fine in tournaments. I think Mike Conley is just fine in tournaments. I would rather Ricky Rubio is in there because he's had some extended success in that matchup, but I'm fine with both those guys. In his current role, Avery Bradley is obviously underpriced on DraftKings at $4,700. He's just really been much more active than, well, I don't want to speak for anyone else, much more active than I certainly thought he would be in that role with his team. So I'm fine with those guys, but I would have them similarly emotionally to how I feel about the Bulls. If you get one, I'm perfectly reasonable with that. I don't think there's any Bulls or any Grizzlies in one lineup for me. On DK, certainly the Valančiūnas price is cheap enough that there is a big upside there, but I'll take Marc Gasol for the same number of minutes and $1,000 less in an infinitely better matchup, probably.
Okay. One thing to note, I'm just going to throw out there, obviously past success, not an indicator of future performance or anything like that.
Sure.
Jonas Valančiūnas did have 160 fantasy point day versus Utah last year. I don't know for a fact that was a game in which Gobert was in. I did see that.
Gobert played in that game.
I thought he did, but I wasn't.
I could be. I will tell you in a minute. Let me download that log, and I'll tell you in a minute. But I will check.
Got to support Jonas. I feel like Jonas has gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit. Hasn't had a big day recently, but
yeah, Gobert played in that game.
So there we go.
60 fantasy points in 27 minutes. At 28-14. That's certainly exciting. I'll tell you how much time Gobert played in that game, but I don't know how much was limited by foul trouble or what have you, but that's obviously an impressive game there.
Yeah, he's capable of it. I just, Jonas, has been great recently. He did burn me a couple nights ago, but I think it's an interesting spot to go contrarian for some of these Grizzlies here. So
yeah, I certainly don't mind. And Gobert was out there that whole game. He played 31 minutes.
All right, so there we go.
So there you go. Now, I mean, in fairness, if you're going to look at all the games they started against each other over the last 5 years,
not that good.
his game log totals are 22 fantasy points, 25 fantasy points, 27, 36, and 60. 60 can obviously happen. We're looking at it there, but it's just that is
not
one out of 5
outcome.
games you're happy with at that price. 1 you're tolerable with, and 3 which you're like, well, I fucked that up. So if we are going to look at the game logs as a topic of conversation, but yeah, I had forgotten that game existed. So.
Yeah, it's a world of infinite outcomes in the world of DFS, so that's always what it is. Dumpster Fire asking, and hopefully this is not a dumpster fire, Luka Doncic, a fantastic low-owned play the other night. We talked about him. We all loved him. Pretty much every show we had loved him that day. Not loving him quite so much today, but how are you feeling about him for Dumpster Fire? Would he be okay as a last man in a FanDuel GPP lineup?
Someone just asked, is it Durant or Paul George? Raw points, I have Paul George for 1.2 more raw points. So, and I feel okay about that. So it ends up being a price conversation, but most places that is going to put you on Durant. But you asked price aside, whomever that was. What was your question there, Chris? I apologize. I got away with myself.
Oh, no, it was a question about Luka Doncic. How are you feeling about him as the last man in a FanDuel GPP after that big day the other day?
I'm fine with it. Obviously you're spending a significant sum of money. I think I would prefer Bradley Beal by a little bit. If you can come up with $700, I would probably prefer most of the guys around him. But he's brilliant. Like I really enjoy watching that man play basketball. I haven't projected in the mid 40s. That doesn't justify a $9,800 price tag, but I wouldn't object to anyone having him in there. And he's going to be 7% owned or something, I think. So that's just fine. I would rather save $1,000 and play Donovan Mitchell, or save $1,300 and play Zach LaVine, or save $1,600 and play Jimmy Butler. Like he's my least favorite shooting guard above $8,000 of the 6 who are going to play. That being said, I don't think he's at all out of play. I believe in this Orlando defense to a reasonable extent. I'm not surprised if they just destroy Dallas, who has given up some destruction recently. So for a number of reasons, he would be last on that list for me, but not to such an extent that I think he's out of play.
All right. I feel like we've covered a lot. Actually, one game that we haven't covered, which I feel like we should probably hit on before going into your notes, but the Denver Golden State game, we've talked about bits and pieces of it. Which guys are you feeling the best about in this game? Obviously going to have a very high total, but could be a little bit squirrely with the defense. So which guys are you feeling best about on both sides?
Yeah, it's interesting. So for the Nuggets, again, it's pretty convincingly for me, having gone back and actually spent some time on this today. I like the wings most. I like Harris and Barton the most at their prices. After that, it's probably Murray, followed by Millsap, followed by Jokic. I like Jokic just fine. There is a giant ceiling here for him. He has generally struggled a bit with Cousins, struggled a bit with Golden State. None of that makes me think that anyone necessarily shouldn't play him. Center is not incredibly deep tonight. So, it's difficult for me to play him for FanDuel $900 more than Andre Drummond, DK $1,300 more than him. But his ownership will be appropriately minimalized. On FanDuel, I would rather play him than Vooch. On DK, I'd probably rather Vooch by a little bit. I wish I had a strong take here. There is a low floor and a high ceiling. Like we have repeatedly seen 35, 40-point games out of Jokic against the Warriors and against Cousins. We've also seen him occasionally, spike out a 60 there. I don't think I'd have him in one lineup. I would certainly have some exposure. Large field. It is a game. It's my favorite. I really am looking forward to watching this game tonight with these two teams finally perfectly healthy. Two teams I really like to watch. See how well Golden State can rebound after their reasonable struggles. But anyhow, they've done a better job of sticking with the starters a few extra minutes. But compared to the other options available at their prices, Barton, especially FanDuel, Harris, especially DK. Fine if you end up with Jamal Murray on either one, although again, huge love for Kemba Walker and a couple other guys, difficult to get there. And then so for Golden State, always, as all things are apparently these days, site dependent. I slightly prefer Durant to Curry by a fairly nominal amount, but if they were the exact same price and positionality irrelevant on whatever site we were talking about, I would slightly prefer Kevin Durant. Of the other three guys, I would very slightly rank them Draymond at his prices, then Boogie, then Clay.
All right. Yeah, Boogie, I get, well, people, now, we don't need to answer the question you just mentioned, Boogie. I guess give me your notes before we go to either ors, because I think all we have left now are a bunch of either ors.
Let's see, we got through most of it. I'm assuming the rankings went through correctly the second time.
I believe I got a notification saying they did. Okay. Yeah, you were good.
I assume we are good there. Let's see that. Pull up my original. It doesn't matter. A lot of is funny trying to get into watching the video earlier today because so many of these teams finished up their matchups early. Like the Bulls and the Pistons played twice in the first 3 weeks of the season, and the Grizzlies and the Jazz played 3 times, all in the first month of the season. So keep starting to look at things, and it's like, hey, none of those guys are on the team anymore.
Yeah. Even Blake Griffin's big day versus the Bulls earlier this year, he had 61 something fantasy points, but he has not been that guy pretty much since that game.
Yeah, that was when he had his 80 came after that, and a couple other ones, but certainly, he has been a little more disappointing. Although he has played, I think, certainly more games than people expected this year. He has been reasonably injury free for Blake Griffin, who's a guy who gets stuck with the injury prone tag a lot. The Hornets and Wizards both play again tomorrow. They are the only teams that do so. I mention this as it is a minor disincentive towards players on the Wizards and the Hornets. They both play tomorrow, but they're the only ones on the front end of a back-to-back. The Thunder are the only team on the back end of a back-to-back. I think we really talked about most things I like here. I don't... it's a woeful matchup for the Cavs. I want to like Jordan Clarkson on FanDuel at $5,000, which is just too cheap for him there. I want to like a couple other players in this game, but especially with Zizic available to play again now, largely working with a stay away there. There's about 2 paragraphs here on what to do if Ben Simmons is out. That doesn't seem very apropos.
Just to confirm, Zizic completely kills Larry Nance for you now, right?
Enough that in a difficult matchup and the price now up to 6 and change. Yeah, I wouldn't see Larry Nance in a lineup and be like, that's terrible. There's no chance he can get there, because obviously he can still get there. But yeah, he'd be well down the list for me. If you get news he's still starting, I don't think we've seen a lineup yet. That would give me some renewed interest, but again would be pretty far down the trough for me. There's some more on the Clippers and Lou Williams and the Thunder and back-to-backs. And no, I think we've done a pretty good job. And if we missed anything, hopefully they will arise in the aforementioned questions.
All right, so get your questions in there. If you're doing it now, Premium Slack gets first dibs, but we'll be going to YouTube if we clear out the Premium Slack. So ask them everywhere. Here's an either or for you. Would you go Cousins, Markkanen, or Chris Paul for a DK GPP?
I would probably play Chris Paul. I think I like the matchup. I think there's a real upside, and then based on the ownership that we expect to see, I would probably go with CP3.
All right. Also, Chris Paul or Harden, who would you like more? We haven't talked really about that either.
I slightly prefer Chris Paul at his prices, both sites.
All right. Let's see what else we got here. Haven't heard Jokic, blah, blah, blah. Durant, Paul George, you answered that one. Royce O'Neal or Darius Miller for a FanDuel GPP?
I'll take Darius Miller.
Okay. Yeah, for a GPP, you might as well.
Yeah, I mean it's very ambivalent. I have Darius Miller projected for 1 fantasy point less. In all fairness, but I imagine Royce O'Neal will be somewhere in the 45 to 50% ownership range on FanDuel. I imagine Darius Miller will be in the 6% range. So I will pretty easy call for me, honestly.
Would you go Marvin Williams or Jay Crowder for Yahoo Cash?
Marvin Williams in cash, not terribly close. I'm a Jay Crowder guy, but Memphis and it's more of a favors spot, and no thanks.
For FanDuel Cash, would you go Kemba, Dre, and Drummond, or Kevin Durant, Randall, and Capella?
I would go Kemba, Dre, and Drummond in cash.
Okay. Boom. Some quality questions. Barton and Gasol or Harris and J-Val for a FanDuel GPP?
I would play Barton and Gasol.
All right. Question's a little slow. Utility spot on DK for 4,700. Do you go Avery Bradley or Terrence Ross, or is there somebody else in there who'd go over those two?
Yeah, both of those are interesting. Again, Marvin is 300 less if you haven't gone there yet off the top of my head. No, I think those are really the two that I like in that range. So yeah, I would probably very slightly, because of the matchup, go with Ross there.
Beal or Donovan Mitchell for a FanDuel GPP?
Well, I mean, it's, I believe, $1,600 between those two guys. I would... Yeah, they're both in the same range for me, where I like them. They're both a little underpriced. Beal are both a little unexciting. Beal just because, I mean, the tag up at 10.5 is obviously starting to cut away at the upside, and there's plenty of guys that, you know, I saved $3,200 by playing Lou Williams. And Donovan Mitchell, the matchup is just so brutal. I'm probably a little more inclined towards Mitchell, but that's fairly close for me.
I guess one for the YouTube chat, because I think there's a bunch of questions here from what I'm seeing. How about a summary of the value guys? Again, we've talked a lot about the Royce O'Neals and the Frank Jacksons, but which of the guys, let's say under 4K on DraftKings, are you feeling the best about?
Someone asked about any fear that Paul George sits this game. I haven't seen anything to specifically indicate that that's something that's up in the air here, but you know, returning from injury back-to-back on the road, I do think it is an increased chance. So on any given day, I would say Paul George's odds of sitting are in the 1 to 2% range. Today, they're probably in the 4 to 5% range. So kind of, sort of relevant, but you know, more of a fan of that play. Again, I would rather play Kevin Durant either site by a little bit, and I would rather play either of them probably on DK. Actually, that's not true. I'd probably rather play Kevin Durant on FanDuel. But if you have Paul George, you know, hopefully you're on DraftKings and just be aware that he could get yanked. But I think you have an appropriate level of trepidation to be concerned that he does get pulled like that. Talking about the value plays again, yeah, Royce and Frank Jackson are your best cash plays. I would probably come in under their projected ownerships for both of them in tournaments, just because they're any number of ways either or both of those guys can fail. And again, I like playing Darius Miller for some obvious leverage. Kenrich Williams at 4,000, Marvin Williams at 4,400, Gary Harris at 4,000. I like a lot as a tournament pivot. Gary Harris is probably pretty close to my favorite one of those. 4,000 on DK is just too cheap. The minutes have increased like 4 games in a row. Nerlens Noel, I think, is in play. Again, his last big game was actually the same day that Adams was struggling on the back end of the aforementioned back-to-back, and the matchup is good enough that even in 16 minutes you're not dead in the water. Ish Smith is going to play his 20 minutes, but it's a pretty strong matchup. 3,600, you could do that. Jalen Brunson, actually just don't play Jalen Brunson. He was more cashy anyway. But Danny Green against New Orleans at $3,800, that's certainly not out of play. So both of those value plays are inconsistent or specious enough that I would look to pivot from them to any of these guys, site dependent. PJ Tucker against Philadelphia at $4,000. It's a spot where he could certainly pick up a lot of corner threes. I like attacking them from the forwards, from the power forward position specifically. So there are some value names. Difficult to specifically rank them, especially with multiple sites in play.
Yeah, I would just I'll echo your sentiment for Gary Harris. I think he's going to benefit from the spacing, that the attention that you mentioned. Klay Thompson's going to chase Murray around. It usually leaves Harris a little bit left behind. And I think it's a good Danny Green spot too. I think it's never fun to put Danny Green in there, but his price is down enough, and this pace and spacing for this matchup should give him some room. So yep. I think those two are decent Royce / Frank pivots. Points per dollar on DK. Would you go with Gasol or Capella?
I'd go with Gasol. Look, Capella's, I'm not trying to talk shit about Capella. $6,700 Capella is really exciting, but it's not as exciting for me as $5,600 Marc Gasol. Again, in a brilliant matchup. It should also be added here. Capella's matchup is very good, but Gasol is even better. Capella has much more upside there. But generally, points per dollar, I would slightly prefer Marc Gasol in the spot these guys are looking at. There's a downside there. Maybe they go back to splitting minutes, and all of a sudden you get 24 and 24 again. That's much less exciting than the 29 I haven't projected for now, or the 30 or 32 I've heard other people mention. But yeah, I will stick with Gasol at this point, especially at, I imagine their ownership ends up being pretty similar, for what it's worth.
Just double check. All right. I don't know if it's been reflected yet in our ownership, but I think that's possible. I'm definitely heavier on Capella for whatever that's worth. I think I feel a little more comfortable with that. And there's no true center really for Philly is what appeals most to me, but usage concerns I think are there.
Yeah, I mean, since he came back from injury, his shot totals are 9, 8, 8, 16, 2, 4, 7.
Yeah.
Now there have been some difficult matchups in there, but he was chalk guy against Atlanta where he was $7,000 and played 35 minutes and had 24 fantasy points. Like, he's just shown, and he has said that he is not 100% healthy yet. So, obviously there's just massive gonzo upside there, but, if we have him projected at, on DK right now, we have him as the top center. I would rather play Dwight Powell in a tough matchup than play him. I would rather play Steven Adams and save $500. I would rather pay up for $8,800 under a Drummond who's in a brilliant goddamn spot and is still underpriced. So it's just, he's fine. He objectively prices nicely, but we know how it can go wrong. And there's other guys who seem pretty good. So I would rather play Marc Gasol at $5,600. So there's 6 or 7 centers I would rather play in a first tournament lineup than chalky, injured Clint Capella.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I think the upside, the ceiling is really what I'm afraid of there with Capella missing out on that. But I agree. Drummond is definitely my favorite center by far today. So that's, let's just put that out there as well. Reggie Jackson or Ish Smith on FanDuel for attorney?
Was Reggie Jackson or Ish Smith? It's got to be Frank.
Yeah, so I guess not price dependent, but I guess just trying to find the right guy there.
Did he say Reggie or did he say?
No, he said Reggie. He did say Reggie.
Ish.
Yeah, Ish over 25 in his last 3, I think is something. For FanDuel cash, would you go Dorian Finney-Smith, Randall, and Capella, or Miller, Draymond, and Drummond?
Miller, Draymond, and Drummond.
DK, GPP, would you go Kemba, Lou, Durant, and Drummond, or Kemba, Beal, Love, and Butler? Why put Kemba?
I lost it, man. You're going to have to do it again. There was too much in the fact
We're not going to get into
the fact they both had Kemba through me. I was like, wait, I thought that, yeah.
I wanted to help the guy out because I think he said last time he was posting them while driving, but you can't put the same guy in both sides of the either or. It just fucks everything.
Well, you can, but reduce your fractions, kids. Reduce your fractions. Hopefully the audio got better. Apparently the audio just went to shit again at the beginning.
Ugh, who knows?
Avery Bradley playing. Dwight Powell starting still, as expected.
Avery Bradley, ride or die, Team Bradley. Hit the like button, by the way. We're going to do a little daddy likes. It is America's favorite game, so support America by liking this button. Unless you're from somewhere that's not America, then support whatever country you're from by playing whatever your country is.
We do have some Aussies. Shout out to our Australian friends. Playing on,
this is
Draft Stars down there. We
easily Australia's favorite game. It's either that or kicking a child with a gigantic boot. Those are the two games that Australia has.
Drinking beer and boxing a kangaroo. Yeah. Or a wallaby.
Let
me see if I can.
run
okay,
this.
we'll get back there.
No, we're not running something back for you at this point. Somebody asking to run back your 8K and over power forwards on FanDuel back. I don't even see how that would help at this point. You're locked, FanDuel.
That's a good point, yes. A couple of them have locked, and 41% Kemba.
Ooh. I'm over it. I'm at 50.
That's approaching the level in which it's like, all right, let's slow our roll here a little bit. But
yeah, no. Kemba's one of those guys. I have a weak spot. It is what it is.
Yeah. So Kemba, 41.3. I'll dislike that marginally. Again, I said, when we were projecting him at 2022, whatever, I'd like 40. So this is 41 and change. I'll stick to my guns and say I'll take a hair less than that. Frank Kaminsky, 20.7. Yeah, that's about the right number for me. Again, I have roughly the same feeling about him and Royce and Frank, and there's I would want to smash them all in there in that 20% ish range. So I'll just go with fine.
Also, apparently your audio is perfect right now. Somebody's saying in the premium Slack.
Hey, someone Emac frequently texts me and said, when you leaned back, the sound is crystal clear. Which doesn't even make any sense that it would be the proximity from me to the microphone. It should be the microphone.
I think it's something with OBS. I think there's something there that excuse me, I'm cursing too much. That messes up whenever you're producing.
I blame Laffy. He's producing, right?
Yeah, Laffy's been producing, and he's been fun.
Okay. No, I blame Laffy. So I'm just kidding. Marvin Williams, 20%. I'd have more. I really like Marvin tonight. Not much more, 25 or so. Jeremy Lamb, 14. I'm fine with that. Beal, 14. Fine with that. Jabari Parker, 13.5. Maybe overreacting to a solid game there.
3 out of 4 over 34 fantasy points.
No, that's true. Again, what was really interesting about that last game is they closed without a true center, which is something they've previously been reluctant to do. You usually always had Bryant or Portis out there, and I don't think either of them closed that game. So
yeah, was Jeff Green closing? I think.
Yeah, they were in Green, Ariza, Parker. So that's exciting. Where are we? I was Jabari Parker. Nick Batum, 12.6. I would like that a good bit more than Jabari Parker or some of the guys above that. And again, I liked him a bit more than Lamb, though they were pretty similarly owned at 12 and change and 14 and change. But I like Batum in this spot. They've just been force-feeding him minutes, so that feels good. Sotoronsky, 6.3. That's fine. Vooch, 6.3. I really love that. That's
intriguing.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Luka, 6%. Feels good. Jalen Brunson, 5.5. At this point, he's more of a pivot. It's just a tough matchup. I'm fine with it, but generally think I'd end up less. Portis at 5%. I like. There is a really big upside there. The matchup with Charlotte is actually one I kind of enjoy.
Good bounce back spot for him potentially.
Yeah. Terrence Ross, 5.2. I like it. Aaron Gordon, 5. Fine. Cody Zeller, 5. Fine. DJ Augustine, 4. Fine. Ariza, 4. Fine. Tim Hardaway, 4. Yeah, one of these days a shot has to fall. Dorian Finney-Smith, 3.75. I don't think I can go there. Like, I ranked him pretty well, maybe as a B and a B or something, but minutes really hard for me to trust. I don't know. We'll have to see how that turns out. Did we get a Mavs lineup? I never saw a Mavs lineup. I was curious if he or Dirk were going to start this game.
I didn't see one come through on the usual sources.
I didn't see one either, which is a little curious. I would have thought I'd have seen one by now. We got Dwight Powell will start. I didn't see the rest of the lineup.
They're just like, no, does anybody really care about this lineup? They've just given up.
We're not even trying to win anymore. Like, why do you care if we don't?
Nor should they. Apparently, like, they can keep their pick if they lose some more.
Yeah, no, like, they have pick rankings. They definitely, they want to let it go and get in the lottery. Lakers too, brother. They're shout out to, I apologize if I do not correctly attribute whomever asked me the question in the last show. They said, are you worried about LeBron's minutes getting reduced as this team heads into the tank? And I said, I'm pretty sure that's going to happen, but I bet it'll be a couple more games. No, it was right there. You had it right.
I brought that up. That was my concern. They did show up one more time for that game, though, which with random Jonathan Williams and Caruso on the floor. But I thought he was just going to phone it in there and he was going to be done that day. But.
Yeah, well, they did. He played 31 minutes in the last game.
That was a death blow. That game to me on the schedule just looked like the death blow the entire time because I think, too, you don't want to give the Celtics that spot where they're the ones who officially end your year and make you go into that mode.
Yeah, put out of their misery. But, it can be interesting to project that team tomorrow, I presume. Where was I? Dwight Powell at too small of a number, 2.4%. I like that. Fournier, 2.5. I like that. Jeff Green, 2.3. I like that. Jonathan Isaac, 1.5. I like that. Thomas Bryant, 1.3. I think is fine. Tony Parker, 0.8. I'm okay with that. Miles Bridges, 0.69. I don't think so. Not really the upside being there. Justin Jackson, 0.44. Again, dozen minutes or so I don't think is going to do it for me. Jerian Grant, 0.17. Isaiah Briscoe out for the foreseeable future. So, maybe get some of that time at the 2. They occasionally dither with those off guards. Dirk, 0.15. Would like to see him starting again to make that sort of decision. But, one seventh of 1%. It's not much of a commitment. Troy Brown, 0.13. Kem Birch, 0.09. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, 0.05. Trey Burke, 0.04. Guillermo Sweet Dick Willie Hernan Gomez, 0.04. Malik Monk, 0.03. Sam Decker, 0.03. Wes Iwundu, 0.03. Shelvin Mack, 0.02. Devontae Graham, 0.01. Maxi Kleber, 0.01. Jan Mahinmi, 0.01. Dwayne Bacon, 0.01. Courtney Lee, 0.01. Devin Harris, 0.01. Isaiah Briscoe, 0.01. Congratulations, you played yourself out for a couple weeks.
That is a random guy to have in there as the only guy who played himself.
We got down there, yeah. Not a lot of people playing themselves today.
Well, good for everybody out there. Good job by those guys.
Yeah, nice job. I think largely the people have started to. They've announced the starting lineup, and Dorian Finney-Smith will start. There you go.
Oh, all right. So that play got slightly better, but still probably not good.
He's you don't want Dirk now, and DFS now probably gets like 26 minutes. I think I had him projected for. So that's, the matchup is brutal, and he's Dorian Finney-Smith, but he's got the right initials for the job.
Yeah, why not? In a day where there's going to be a lot of cheap value floating around, take your shots on the Dorian Finney-Smiths of the world. Why not? All right. Anything else you wanted to hit on? Otherwise, I'm just going to beg people for likes. Give us likes before you go. Please hit that like button. Tip your bartender on the way out.
Number one of 17 consecutive days with between 6 and 9 games on the schedule. 17 days in a row. A couple of them, yes, we have 4 and 5 game slates because weekends split humorously, but literally from today, the first of 17 days in a row with a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 9 games on the schedule. Oh, that's wild. So you're going to be having fun for the next 17 Beautiful.
Days.
Yes, I didn't want to take yesterday off. Things have been going well. We've been on a pretty good streak. Had a couple really close to perfect games, and people had been winning, and I wanted to do it. But then I looked at the schedule, and I'm like, all right, I will try to take one in the middle of this 17-game stretch. But, yeah, I better take one off today. Shout out to our great program director, if you will, Josh Engelman, who will join me for Sunday's show. Tomorrow, I imagine I have Emac sitting astride me for Live Before Log. But for Sunday, Josh Engelman, whose wife is out of town, not with another man. I don't know who started that vicious rumor. No truth to it whatsoever. But Josh is going to sit down with me and do the Sunday show, so you get a rare Josh appearance, which I'm forcing him to do because I don't get as much Josh FaceTime as I would like. And I was like, look, I'm going to go yesterday unless you do a weekend show with me. He's like, fine, I'll do Sunday. I'm like, all right, deal. I'll take a day off. So took a day off.
It's a good negotiation. That negotiation probably distracted him from all the cucking that he's currently receiving.
I'm going to try to see if I can sneak into the setup before the show and just replace his name, Josh Engelman, just say cuckold.
Soy boy cuck, old Josh Engelman. That'll be fun. That's a good show on Sunday for you guys. Yeah. Also, one last note, I feel like, because we did talk about official sports, our guy Mr. T's is one of my favorite guys. We all have favorites, but you're all my favorite. But Mr. T's up there. Apparently, oil wrestling is the official sport of Turkey. So take that to the bank.
Shout out International Women's Day today.
Well, I think the Turkish oil wrestling is just like some old school Greek Greco-Roman type stuff.
Oh, you mean it's like whoa. No. Oh wait. Okay, I gotta take this all in. Oil wrestling. He
says, I learned at trivia last week that oil wrestling is the official sport of Turkey.
I believe you. Now my question is, oil wrestling? Like I consider myself somewhat of a wrestling aficionado, both amateur and professional. I've never heard of oil wrestling referring to people with testes. What limited oil wrestling I've been fortunate enough to see in my 42 years on this planet, no men were involved. So are you sure?
Wikipedia has it. It's a fully fleshed out article, also called Greek wrestling. It is a Turkish national sport. It's so called because the wrestlers douse themselves with olive oil. It's like a dish, like a delicious halal meat plate.
Hairy Middle Eastern men slapping against each other. Oil flying. It's like SeaWorld. You're in the front row of the oil wrestling and just kadoosh. And you're like, oh, can you get some on my falafel?
Oh man, that's fun. That is a fun fact. Thank you, Mr. T's. That's why you're one of my favorites.
That's very useful information that I didn't have. I now know that oil wrestling is a thing with men in Asia Minor, and I'm excited to know that information.
Let's all get our olive oils ready and go grease ourselves up for the weekend. Thank you guys for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Honestly, it's been a lot of fun this week. We've had some really good success. A lot of people tweeting us winning screenshots. Also, I'm going to give my personal shout out. Thanks for everybody watching the Four Corners video this week. There's a lot of crossover, obviously, with the audiences, but been getting a lot of views on that. Our only short form content we have for basketball on the channel.
Who are your Four Corner studs today? I don't want to give you a shot to shout out your guys. Who are you super high on?
I go game by game instead because I find it a little bit easier to talk about the stuff and cover my ass when one of the picks invariably fails.
Which is a key strategy in oil wrestling, by the way.
Yeah, but Kemba was my thumbnail. The thumbnail's actually been killing it. I had LaMarcus Aldridge. I had Lillard this week in the thumbs. Today is Kemba in the thumb. So Kemba's my dude who I backed it up with my lineups. I am heavily over the field with Kemba.
There's no reason not to like him at that price other than the fact that he's 41.3% owned. But outside of that, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Apparently I made a pun in it. I said fully fleshed out, and I did not mean I did not. But it works. It all works. It all comes together.
Our sponsors, stop it.
Yes, we can't do that. Thank you guys for watching. Hit the like button on the way out, and check out this weekend. Eddie, you're on Saturday and Sunday. Tomorrow probably with Emacs. Sunday with Josh. Some big shows, but check Eddie out. Eddie's doing a great job. Follow him on Fast Eddie Fear on Twitter as well. Does a great job on there, keeping people up with things. Follow me, Chris Specs. Do throw me a pity follow, and we'll see you guys again soon. Good luck.
Take care.